Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is a new way of being. And we get to explore what it might be like to shift our fundamental assumptions, even just one, to shift our experience of life. So we get to dig into that. But before we get started, let's just take a minute or two to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs and flowing into your bloodstream and nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, any stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, all your molecules, all your electrons. And as you exhale any remaining tension or stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's just gently press our palms together, very, very softly. Let's feel that tingling and tickling as we rub our palms together. Gently, gently, just feel the deliciousness of that, like really presence yourself to that sensation and the wonder of the fact that we have these remarkable senses to experience the world in these wonderful bodies that we live in. Welcome, welcome. So good to have you here this morning. It's great to share this time with you. And I am thinking about, well, the reason that this topic came up for today is that I did a meditation when I woke up at 4:30 this morning. And it was a Joe Dispenza meditation, and it was talking about new ways of being and looking at what is a fundamental, like how can we step into a new way of being? And in order to step into a new way of being, we first need to be aware of the existing way of being, right? To be able to create contrast and recognize another possibility. So when we look at our ways of being, it's kind of like the fish in water thing, where a fish doesn't necessarily know it's in water, right? Until all of a sudden it isn't anymore, right? It's like we don't know that we're in oxygen, we're in air, it's assumed. And I think that that's the case with so many of our beliefs and our assumptions, is that it's just so much a part of our experience that we don't discern its impact or its influence. And so I'm wondering, what does it take? What does it take to be able to identify patterns and beliefs that are foundational to our experience? So one of the ways I think that we can approach this is to look at the things that we experience as problems. So maybe when we wake up in the morning, what's the first thing we do? Do we set an intention for the day, or do we review our grievances? Do we think about all of the do we overwhelm ourselves with all the things we have to do, in big air quotes? Do we check our social media to see what people are saying? what are the ways that we start our day that that set the tone for the day, and how does that reflect a way of being? So if we're I'm just trying to think. Good morning, good morning. Rosalind, welcome. So good to have you here this morning. We're talking about new ways of being and identifying places that if we were to shift them, our whole experience of living really would change. So one of the things that I recognized in this review for myself this morning, looking at what kinds of new ways of being might there be, I was thinking about the contacts that I have and trying to make things happen. That's kind of what I was aware of, is like I'm in the process of trying to arrange a trip, and it's been a bit of a struggle. And so as I recognize that there's been a little bit of a struggle in this planning sort of thing, I recognize that my way of being was trying to grab a hold of something, trying to force something to happen and reaching out for something rather than allowing that thing is going to come to me, almost out of in some dimension, almost in a sort of scarcity mindset, that I had to make it happen. And it was feeling like a struggle. And so I started entertaining the possibility of, well, what if instead of me having to make it happen, reaching out, and that I could invite it to come to me, that I could allow myself to receive. And that's a very different place of being. And I realized that there are places in my life where I'm pursuing something rather than inviting something. And that is a fundamental shift of energy from like this outward grasping kind of thing to an inward allowing and receiving, allowing things to unfold without having to try and force it or bend it to my will in some way, shape, or form. And so I see where I can continue to remind myself to allow things to unfold, to have the fundamental assumption that things are coming to me, that I don't have to make things happen, that they are coming to me. And if that's the case, what does that shift? And I'm using me as an example, hoping that you'll be able to identify some of these things for yourself. So what's the difference? If I have the assurance that everything is flowing and coming to me in a natural order, then there's a greater sense of ease. There's a greater sense of relaxation. And what I noticed is after I was able to identify that shift in being and to presence myself as an invitation rather than as a force, that my body was actually able to relax in a whole lot deeper way. Really be able to let go of the tension that I hadn't even been aware I was holding in my body, in my muscles. And so I'm wondering for you, what do you notice? What can you identify for yourself as a way of being that, and it might be really subtle, it might not show itself overtly in every circumstance, where in my case, I don't see the making things happen as a primary drive in myself. And I saw this one circumstance where creating some, or I'm creating, or had been creating some resistance, disruption, aggravation over having trying to impose my doingness, my will on this situation rather than allowing it, inviting it to allowing somebody else to take care of it for me, potentially. So to be in a receiving mode rather than a deliberate, active, creative mode, creating mode. Because we were talking about creativity yesterday and how creativity in its highest form is, and that's my perception anyway, is a being in the flow, is kind of surrendering to the flow and being an expression of life flowing through, of creativity flowing through. So Rosalind says, thank you so much for replying, Rosalind, by the way. Rosalind says, I wanted to do some backyard improvement, but wasn't able to find contractors to come give bids. I think I'll be able to achieve the same space or intent by transforming one of my bedrooms into a healing space with a smaller scope of work and cost. Beautiful. So this is interesting, because you say that you wanted to do some backyard improvements, but you couldn't find the contractors to give the bids. That's kind of the situation that I'm in, where I'm wanting to organize this trip, and I'm just not getting the communication and the back and forth in a way that is working. And so what's awesome, and you say this, Rosalind, the time delay allowed me to rethink the scope of work. So by looking at the intent, you were able to redefine the objective in a way that sounds like it better serves you. The other thing is that maybe there's the sense of, like I'm thinking that in my situation, the reason that it isn't flowing is that I have some resistance or some expectation that I'm imposing that is creating this kind of friction. And part of the expectation is I have to make it happen versus, it is happening. And if it is going to happen, then I can invite it to be taken care of from the other end. And that I get to pay attention to the dynamics in a very different way. So it sounds like that's kind of what you did, Rosalind, in that given the delay in the contractors, it gave you the opportunity to reevaluate what was your intention and how can you best serve that intention. So yeah, I when we want something, that wanting in and of itself can be creating a resistance. And sometimes I have found that the more I want something, the further it is from my reach or my experience. And that by definition, when we say I want something, it means I lack that thing, right? Whereas we can be in another space of receiving and allowing and inviting. And so what I'm talking about is finding that way of being with a given situation and shifting the way of being that is creating the friction, to be, well, what, I mean, really, if I could just always be in a place of allowing, if I could always be an invitation, like instead of wanting to push the river, to allow the river to come to me, so to speak. I think the basic underlying assumption is a shift from I have to make it happen to it's all happening exactly in its perfection, and I'm inviting it to come in. It's a really different way of being, and it can change everything, every experience, to be allowing that flow. And so I'm excited for you, Rosalind, to be turning one of your bedrooms into a healing space, because that sounds amazing. And it sounds amazing to be able to have such ready access to a sacred space that you're creating. That's awesome. And I wonder what, if you can look at the beingness behind it, what kind of shift is there, or can there be, or was there, that could be, perhaps that shift of being could be propagated throughout life to create a whole new trajectory of possibility in life. So, being an invitation is what I'm feeling around it, is that it's a shift for me from an aspect of lack that I wasn't aware of, to an aspect of bounty, to be like that there was an underlying assumption somehow, and it was maybe just a tiny little thread of I can't get what I want underlying, I can't get what I desire, and instead shifting to, of course I can, I'm receiving, I'm here to all my desires are being fulfilled. And that's a radical shift, because when there is that foundational assumption that all my desires are being fulfilled easily and magically and wonderfully, then life is transformed. And so, this conversation comes not only from that meditation, but it also comes from the core connection work that I do with my clients, this modality that I've developed over the past 30 plus years. And the way that I start the very first session is with the question, what in your way of being, if it were to change, would be life altering? And that's really what this conversation is about. What in your way of being, what kind of shift in beingness, if it were to change, would be life altering, would propagate out into the rest of your life? So another example is from someone that I was working with who has had extreme issues around anxiety. And as we looked more deeply into the anxiety, then what arose was a perception of self that was needed to be monitored in order to be kept in line. That there were all these assumptions underlying this vigilance that became anxiety. And those assumptions were about, boiled down to self-worth or self-trust. And so the shift of being is a shift to self-assurance and self-trust and self-confidence. And so interestingly, when talking about the results of the session, what arose was a greater sense of groundedness in life, that was one of the consequences of the work that we did, which was reducing then the anxiety. So what we get to look at is what are some of our fundamental ways of being that are the pivot points, that are the keys to shifting our entire experience. And I think that particularly in our Western culture, we are indoctrinated to believe that we have to go out and make things happen, and we work hard, and working hard is what accomplishes things in the external world. And we have a very high value that we place on hard work. And I think that we may be moving to a new place of being. I mean, the notion of hard work, there are some other assumptions that come along with that, like nothing comes easy, and a value on suffering, and taking the easy way out is something that we don't respect as a culture, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas I think good morning, Lisa. Welcome. It's so good to have you here. We're talking about new ways of being. And so I think we're moving from this work ethic. It's so interesting, even just when I bring up the words work ethic, what's the other side of work ethic is laziness, right? But it isn't really. There's, a work ethic, I think, is, Lisa says, my mother always told me I do things the hard way. Well, yeah. And I think that there's some cultural confusion around that, right? Because we don't want to do things the hard way, but we don't want to take the easy way out, right? It's craziness. But I think we're moving from this nose to the grindstone type ethic to a manifesting and flowing approach toward creatorship in the world. Or at least a bunch of us are, right? And so it makes us reassess our values. It's like we got to make it happen rather than allow things to emerge or to manifest. Manifesting is different than making things happen, right? It's allowing, it's inviting, it's receiving. And rather than dominating, controlling, exerting, there are all these very, very different. I think in a way, it not in a way, pretty overtly, it's a movement from the harsh and often unbalanced aspects of the masculine to the balanced aspects of the feminine, receiving There is a creatorship for sure, but it's a very different, it's a collaborative rather than a dominating kind of creatorship. So what are the ways of being that you can identify in yourself that, or one way even, that if it were to change, would change your experience of life? So I think it's a worthy question to engage with, because there's so much potential for transformative change without a huge amount of effort. You know, part of it is awareness. Part of it is looking at what are some of those assumptions. Like I realized that there was, for me, still some remnant of an assumption that I couldn't have what I wanted, or what I desired, rather. You know, there was still that assumption, rather than, of course I can have what I desire. And it's, and the universe is serving it up to me on a moment by moment basis. What if we are able to make that shift? It changes everything. Some very seemingly minor little tweak changes everything. And so I invite you to look to see what are some of those basic assumptions. You know, like if you're struggling with something, maybe it is that thing is just not the appropriate thing for you. And maybe it is a way to be able to identify that there's some underlying assumptions or beliefs that could use some adjustment. So Lisa says, switching to the side of gratitude makes for a lot of change. Just saying the one thing you're thankful for instead of what bugs you. Exactly. And what we look at, what bugs us, that can also give us a key to what we can do to make that shift. So, you know, when we're looking at what bugs us, we're definitely not in gratitude. Gratitude is so powerful. Lisa, thank you so much for bringing that up, because it truly is profoundly powerful and transformational. So, and it doesn't necessarily change all the foundational assumptions. You know, when we can identify, oh, you know, I'm feeling like, or there's a fundamental assumption that I need to work hard for anything that I want to receive. So Lisa says it was a hard lesson to learn and correct. Well, good for you to have done that. Like, to be present enough to remember to presence yourself to gratitude. That's a big deal. That's awesome. So I think that that's it for today. I think, you know, the invitation is to identify a foundational assumption that you could shift that will propagate out into the rest of your life and all your behaviors. It's amazing how one little shift, it's like a pebble in a pond. It can just keep rippling out throughout all aspects of your life. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for being here with me. I just really, really, really appreciate you so deeply. My name is Mira Rubin, and I go live each weekday morning here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page. And I invite you to check out the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Networks. One with the Earth, EWN, One with the Earth, and Enlightened World Living. And Good morning or good afternoon, Hope. So good to have you here. I'm so glad you were able to stop by and hope to have you catch the replay. And Lisa says, I wrote one thing I'm grateful for, blessed for, and thankful for every day. That's a beautiful, beautiful practice, Lisa. Might be something for the rest of us to adopt and enjoy. And so with that, so much love to you. And I hope to see you again here real soon. Have an amazing, miraculous